A new addition to the toolkit is computers. Okay, computers are these interactable objects which contain a number of different screens. And a screen can be, for example, here a login screen. You could have a security camera screen, messages screen. So let's go through how the computers work. So once you add the computer prefab to your scene and have it initialized, we'll go over how to set it up and design it the way you want in just a moment. But once you have it in your scene, you should be then able to interact with it. And by default, it will require a login. This is optional. You can choose to have the user log in with a username and password. You might want them to just have a password as well, or you might want them to just open up the navigation screen, so you can skip over login entirely. So for this example here, the username is player and the password is 1234. We can click login, but before I do, let's just go over what happens if I have the wrong password. So let's say 123 and I click login. You see it says incorrect password, and if I have an incorrect username, it says unknown user. So let's put in the correct username and password and click login, and there we go. Now we are in the navigation screen, which is the root screen. And basically, if you're on a screen and you want to go back, this is sort of like the hub of the computer. So you can see we have a bunch of different things we can access. We can go email, which is the message system. You can essentially send messages to the player for them to read. For example, you can see here we have the sender as well as the subject line. We can click into the message and we can read it here. We can then click back. We can view this other message and you can see it has an attachment. And attachments are essentially images that you can send over. So if you want to send a clue or a hint at where something might be for the player, you can do that. But what about receiving messages? Well, if I jump out of the computer here for a second, I've got a button set up over here, and if I click on it, you'll hear a sound, and we have a new message appearing at the top. So we can click on it and then view the new message. So based on things that happen in your game, you might want to send messages to the player. This can be good as a tutorial. It can also be good in horror games if you want to sort of step the player through a job they have to do and then have that lead up to a scare. Or even in a puzzle game, you can have the player receive clues through the messaging system. Now, we also have security cameras. So over here, we have a security camera. There's another video going over the security camera system, so check that one out as well. But we have a security camera set up here, and we can actually view them through the computer. So if we go to the security cameras screen, you can see here we have our cameras listed here. Corner camera, which is that one we were just looking at, and we can see it pacing back and forth, and then the distant cam, which is a bit further out. So we can jump between those two. Again, this would be really good for horror games where you might want the player to be locked in a room watching the level around them. You know, you can of course scare the player through this as well. We can then go back. And finally, we have the remote access screen. And here is where you can essentially just add a bunch of interactables. For example, unlocking a door. So if I try and interact with this door over here, it's currently locked. But if we go to this screen, I can unlock the door, and now I can go over and open and close it. And you can add many sorts of things. You can have interactions with levers, with buttons, with all sorts of interactables in the game. So you can even use this screen to trigger events to progress the story, for example. Now, you're not stuck with this green screen right here. You can also have different color schemes, and this is done using a scriptable object, so you don't actually have to jump in and change the colors manually. You can do it via a scriptable object, which has different swatches for the primary, secondary, background, text, elements, and all that. So as you can see here, this is the coffee color palette, which is a nice brown. And then we have a black and white color palette if you want, you know, that sort of thing for your game. So yeah, that is a look at computers inside the Exploration Toolkit. Now let's go over how we can actually set these up. So first thing you want to do is inside of your scene, you want to go to your Exploration Toolkit Manager and add in the Computer Manager prefab. So this is located in the Core Prefabs Systems Management folder, and the Computer Manager essentially just keeps a register of all the computers in your scene, as you can have multiple of them, and also manages the input events because these computers use a virtual mouse that is simulated using the input system. So if you want to use computers in your game, you do have to use Unity's built-in input system, as that is how we go about creating and managing our virtual mouse. Now, once you have that inside your scene, what you can do is then add the computer prefab. And this is located in the implementation, prefabs, computers folder. Simply drag that into your scene and you should be good to go. So this is an interactable object, as you can see here. If I enable gizmos, you can see we have a collider on the outside, and in the inspector, we have a few different components, okay? We first of all have the computer controller, which manages the user account that the player must log in with. You can choose if you want to require a login or not, as well as requiring a username. Then down here for screens, this is where we want to list out all the different screens that we have inside of our computer, and these are all UI containers. And then down here, you can see we have a login screen index. This is the index of the screen in the list here for the login page. And the root screen index is going to be the index for the navigation screen, okay? When we press back on other screens, we always want to go back to the root screen, and that is just linking it there. And of course, you can then set your color palette here as well. And if I click on the green color palette, that's going to go to the color palettes folder, which we have a couple set up right here. And as you can see in the inspector, you can of course change those colors. And to create a new color palette, simply right click, go create, down to exploration toolkit, computer, color palette. Okay, so for your computer, you also must specify a user, and the user is essentially going to be the player, okay? So if I select the user here in computer controller, it's going to take us to the users folder, and here I have a couple, player, admin, mysterious user. You'll see that they have a username, password, display name, and email address. You don't have to fill all of these in. These are just if you want to receive messages and stuff like that. But for the player, if you want them to log in, you need to specify a username and password, and a display name or email address is what's going to be used for when they receive messages, okay? And this could be the player's in-game name or something like that. Then for any sort of other characters that you might want to send the player messages, you can of course set their account up like this. They do not need a username or password, that's entirely optional, but they do need a display name and or an email address, okay? You can choose to display in the messages a display name or email address. Okay, so back to our computer object. We already went over the screen, so let's then go down to messages. You can specify a list of starting messages to be in the player's inbox at the start of the game, as well as how you want the user to be displayed. Do you want to display them via their display name or their email address? Okay, if you're creating a more retro sort of horror game, you might want an email address, but it's up to you. So with these messages, if I select them, you'll see these are all scriptable objects, and each message contains a sender, which is the character who is sending the message, the recipient, which most likely is always going to be the player, unless of course the player stumbles upon a computer, maybe in an abandoned house where the computer has received messages for someone else who, the player might be investigating. You can then add a subject line and then the content here. Now, I mentioned before that messages can also have attachments, and down here you'll see image attachments. You can essentially assign sprites here to be sent over, and these will appear beneath the text content. So you can see we have a bunch of different starting messages here. You can of course create your own by right-clicking, going create, and then going down exploration toolkit, computer, message. Oh, and you can create a user here as well. Now, to send a message to the computer, let's look at this button right here, which sends a message. So on this button, if we go down to events, you can see simply you connect the computer and you call its send new message function, sending over that message scriptable object, and that will then send it to the player's computer or send it to whatever computer you specify, and it can also then play a little sound as well. So, going back to our computer, let's continue on. Down here we then have sounds, and you can specify some sounds for when the login has succeeded, failed, and when a message has been received. And then we also have a number of other components. Since the computer is interactable, we have an interactable component, and we also have a camera focusable component because this computer has the camera detached from the player's head and zoom in to the screen. So we use the camera focus system here. Okay, so now let's look at what actually makes up a computer. So if we open it up, you'll see there is a large number of different objects. We first of all have the 3D model right here. We have the camera focus point, which is where the camera is going to zoom in onto. We then have the screen mesh. Now this right here is a simple quad which has a material that renders what the screen is looking at, okay? And you may notice that the canvas that the computer uses to simulate its screen is not here. Okay, the way we do the rendering for the computer screen is with a separate camera to a render texture. And if we look down here, you'll see we have a computer screen renderer, and you may be wondering where it is, and it is actually down here beneath the ground, okay? So this right here is a separate camera, which is deactivated, and it gets manually triggered. So the rendering for this camera is manually controlled at this specified frame right here. So you can simulate a laggy computer by reducing the frame rate or keeping it higher, but it also does save in performance since we are outputting to a render texture. And here you can see we have, in the computer render screen, we have the master render texture, which is the asset we copy at the start of the game. So we basically create a new instance of this render texture, and you can specify the computer's resolution here. And we also create a new instance of the computer screen material, which is what gets applied to the screen mesh right here. Now, the computer screen renderer, it contains a canvas, a world space canvas, and this has all of the different screens. So we have the login screen here, we have the navigation screen, we have the security camera screen, and each of these have their specified components that are used to manage them, okay? And these all extend from computer screen base, okay? So if you want to create a new screen, you can add it to the list here, but make sure you either add your custom computer screen component, or you add a computer screen base, as this contains some callback functions that are required. Then what you do is select your computer, go down to its screens list, and simply add it to the list here. And yeah, you can of course go through and see how these individual screens work and how they communicate with each other and how they navigate from one to another. You can of course dive in and see all that. But finally, we have the cursor. Now, I mentioned before how the cursor for this computer is a virtual mouse using Unity's input system. Because since we are viewing a screen through a render texture, there's quite a few layers of abstraction. And the way we do this is essentially by overriding the event system of the scene whenever the player uses a computer. So instead of their actual mouse being able to interact with UI elements, we are creating a virtual mouse which we are moving independent of the actual mouse cursor, and then using that to click on the different UI elements. So yeah, make sure you have the cursor here set up correctly, and you can of course change how fast the cursor is and the sound effects inside the inspector here. So from there, I recommend experimenting with adding different screens, seeing how they work. We also have our two other computers here, which are much more stripped down. You can see they have no screens, no messages, and they actually only have a single screen right here, just to display the color palette. And you may also notice down here, I have all of these screens off center from one another. And that is because if you have them all along the same plane, the interaction system that is used, or the Unity event system, might interfere with other computers' UI elements. So just make sure that you have the cameras and the renderers moved off center from another if you are going to have multiple computers in a scene, but for the most part, you're probably only going to have one, so this is not really an issue that you need to figure out until it pops up. So yep, that is a look at computers inside of the Exploration Toolkit. There's lots to do here, lots of things you can add and interact with in your world, so hopefully it goes well and you create some cool games using it.